have the ova starting from the primary ovum to secondary ovum, and then it becomes the tertiary follicle, and then we have the large follicle which comes close to the surface of the capsule, and then it is released from the ovarian capsule surface, from where it is picked up by the fimbrial end of the fallopian tube, and it travels through the fallopian tube, goes into the endometrium, where it might meet the sperm and get fertilized. So apart from the germ cells, which are the ovum over here, and the surface epithelial cells, we have the stromal cells, which are formed of the long thinned out fibroblastic-like stroma, along with blood vessels and capillaries. Once the corpus, the tertiary follicle has burst through the capsule, it gets converted into a corpus luteum, which is surrounded by a thick layer of the luteinized cells, which will secrete the progesterone, and that will undergo later on atrophy and fibrosis, which will be seen as the corpora albicans. Fine. So these are the things which we are generally concerned about. We will come back to this structure of the ovary when we discuss the tumors of the ovary also, because the tumors may arise from the surface epithelial cells, they may arise from the germ cells, and they may arise from the sex cord stromal cells of the ovary. So this was just a diagrammatic representation showing you the various cells which are present. Apart from that, you have the blood vessels, you have the stromal cells, which sometimes may also lead to some stromal conditions. Fine. So going on to what are the lesions of the ovary. So as we have discussed in the endometrium, there could be inflammations of the endometrium, which are called as endometritis, inflammation of the cervix, which would be cervicitis. Similarly, when you have inflammation extending into the ovary, we call it oophorytis. Now, ovarian inflammations are very uncommon, as you would know that ovary is embedded deep into the pelvis, lying on both sides of the uterus. So the way the infection can reach into the ovary would be usually accompanied by a tubal infection. So there will be salpingitis and there will be oophorytis. So generally they occur together when we call it salpingo-oophorytis. Now, how can it reach the ovary? One is through the ascending infection, going from the vagina to the cervix, then going to the endometrium, and from the endometrium fimbrial, from the endometrium to from the isthmus of the fallopian tube, it may go towards the into the fallopian tube, the whole of the wall, and that can lead to spread of the infection into the ovary also. So the spread of the infection into the ovary along with the fallopian tube is called as the salpingo-oophorytis, and because this inflammation cannot drain out, then it will be called as the abscess formation, which will lead to tubo-ovarian mass and abscess. Slides are not changing. Are the slides changing over there? Because I've got the feedback that the slides are not changing. Let me know. Shashwat, you are seeing it. So can I have a feedback from you whether the slides are changing or not? Slides are not moving. Okay, I'll try it again. The slides are not moving, so I'll let you know again. So maybe I should close this and then try it. I have gone on to the fourth slide, so please let me know if the slides are visible. I'll redo it again. No? So, no, there is no change in the slide. Any change now? I've gone on to the ovarian tumor slides. So I'll log in again. Absolutely, Bhavi. Troubleshoot. Is there any change in slides now? Yes? Okay, we'll start again. Yes? All right. Fine. So as I described the first slide, it is the diagrammatic representation of the microscopic section. So you can see the surface epithelial cells, which is a thin layer of flattened or cuboidal epithelium present on the capsular side, and we can have the occurrence of surface epithelial tumor from this. So a breach of the capsule would be very important as of the origin. Then we have the germ cells in the ovaries, which would be from the primary follicle, which will convert into a secondary follicle surrounded by the luteal cells, and then there will be a tertiary follicle formation. The tertiary follicle, when it forms in the cortex, it reaches close to the capsule, bursts out of it, from where it is picked up by the fibril end of the fallopian tube, and then it will traverse the wall of the fallopian tube and would get implanted after fertilization into the endometrium. So then what happens to the residual part of the corpus luteum? The corpus luteum will residually undergo fibrosis and it will become a corpora albicans. Fine. So then we have the stromal cells, which are the long thinned out, spindled out cells of the stroma of the ovarian tissue, which would be there. So coming on to the lesions of the ovaries, here you can see that the lesions of the ovaries can be the cystic lesions of the ovaries, or there can be inflammation of the ovaries. The inflammation of the ovary is called as oophorytis, and generally it occurs in combination with inflammation of the fallopian tube, which is called as the salpingo-oophorytis. So this is an uncommon condition and can usually occur either by the hematogenous spread of the systemic infection when bacteremia has occurred, or it can be there as part of the ascending infection of the fallopian tube. Ascending infection which reaches the fallopian tube through the endometrium, from where it reaches through the cervix. So an infection of the vagina, when neglected, can go on to cervicitis, it can go on to endometritis, and so that acute inflammation of the endometrium can lead on to pus discharging and bacteria going into the fallopian tube, leading on to salpingitis, then occurring and forming the oophorytis called as the salpingo-oophorytis. So because the pus cannot drain itself, it gets collected into the ovarian parenchyma. So it may present as an abscess in the ovary called as the ovarian abscess, or along with the fallopian tube, it would be a tubo-ovarian abscess or a tubo-ovarian mass lesion, and that would present with systemic symptoms of acute inflammation, which would be fever, abdominal pain, pelvic pain, dysmenorrhea. So those are the usual features that you will get in patients with oophorytis. Now coming on to the second pathology, which is common in the ovary, you can have cysts which may be found operatively when they are small in size, or the larger cyst may become palpable. So because it is the ovaries are present in the pelvis, it's only when the cysts become very large they would be palpable. Otherwise, commonly the small size cysts ranging from up to 3 centimeter in size may be observed just during the surgery when you have opened up the pelvis for some other reason. Say the patient is undergoing a surgery, a cesarean section, and you happen to see both the ovaries and they are having the cyst, or you have done ultrasound or a radiological investigation like CT or MRI for some other cause, and then you can see there are some cysts in the ovaries. So most common cysts in the ovaries are the follicular cysts. Follicular cysts are nothing but the tertiary follicles which have become large and cystic. So they may be single or multiple. And then due to delayed resolution of the central cavity of the corpus luteum, which is filled up with blood, we call it a luteal cyst. What is the corpus luteal cyst? Corpus luteal cyst is nothing but a corpus luteum which has not got resolved by the end of the cycle, and the central cavity of the corpus luteum is filled up with large amount of blood, so it appears like a blood-filled luteal cyst surrounded by luteal cells which are large pale eosinophilic cysts. The other condition in which you can have multiple cysts is commonly known as the polycystic ovarian disease or polycystic ovarian syndrome. Fine, so commonly abbreviated as PCOD or PCOS. So what is polycystic ovarian disease? Polycystic ovarian disease is characterized by multiple cystic follicles. So they are nothing but follicular cysts which have become large, and many of them are simultaneously seen over there. So why they are multiple simultaneously seen? Obviously the ovum is not getting discharged through the capsule. So there is capsular thickening. So there is a thick fibrous capsule of the ovary which does not permit the ovum to be released out of the follicles from the tertiary follicles. As a result, multiple follicular tertiary follicles or follicular cysts are present in the ovarian parenchyma simultaneously. So because the ovulation is not occurring, the ovum is not getting discharged, so this patient presents with infertility. The other conditions which are associated with polycystic ovarian syndrome is obesity, hirsutism, increased facial hair, oligomenorrhea, so decreased amount of blood passed during the menstrual cycle, which is oligomenorrhea, and it is also associated with resistance to insulin. So there is increased insulin level, but there is peripheral tissue resistance to insulin. As a result, many of them may appear to be diabetic also. Insulin resistance is seen in type 2 diabetes as well. So this may progress on to type 2 diabetes, but at this moment she may just have an abnormal glucose metabolism due to insulin resistance. So the components which are seen in the polycystic ovarian syndrome called as the Steen-Leventhal syndrome are oligomenorrhea, obesity, hirsutism, increased facial hair, polycystic ovaries, and it generally presents with infertility. So you can diagnose the patient when you are investigating her for infertility. You do an ultrasound and you get multiple cystic follicles. Ovulation has not occurred. So persistent anovulation will lead to increased estrogen, and hyperestrogenism will lead to presence of formation of fibroadenomas, leiomyomas, and ultimately endometrial hyperplasia, and the endometrial hyperplasia with atypia, and when it progresses, it may lead on to endometrial carcinoma in a young patient. So now, what happens in polycystic ovarian disease? There is increased secretion of luteinizing hormone under the effect of luteinizing hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus releases excess amount of the luteinizing hormone releasing hormone, from which the luteinizing hormone is released from the pituitary, and this stimulates the theca cells of our tertiary follicles, leading to increased androgen formation. So this androgen gets converted into estrone, and hence there is hyperestrogenism in polycystic ovarian syndrome, and this hyperestrogenism leads to development of estrogen dependent tumors, which could be fibroadenoma, endometrial, or effect on the tissues, hormone dependent tissues like endometrium, which will lead to endometrial hyperplasia and may progress on into endometrial hyperplasia with atypia, and then on to endometrial carcinomas. In 25% of these patients, there is also simultaneously increased prolactin levels secreted from the pituitary gland. So hyperprolactinemia is seen in roughly 1/4 of all these patients. So we know that endometriosis can also present as a cyst in the ovary, which we have discussed last time as an endometriotic cyst or a chocolate cyst. The color of the altered blood which is present in this cystic structure resembles like the brown color of the chocolate, hence the name has been given as the chocolate cyst, right? So this means that when we do a biopsy of this, we will get endometrial stroma, endometrial glands, and the hemoglobin converted into hemosiderin, so there will be hemosiderin deposits. So 2 out of these 3 when present, we call it as endometriotic cyst. And when it gets ruptured or in the wall of the ovary itself, there is fibrous thickening of the wall, which you can see. So this fibrous thickening which occurs leads to frozen, thickened pelvic fibrosis. The patient will present with infertility. So that was about the cystic follicles and endometriotic cyst, which are the non-neoplastic cysts in the ovaries, the most common non-neoplastic cysts. Now going on to the neoplasms of the ovary. So neoplasms of the ovary, why do we need to know? Because they are the third most commonest tumor in the female genital tract. The other commonest tumor is the carcinoma of the cervix, and the second common is the carcinoma of the endometrium. The third commonest tumors occurring in the female genital tract are the ovarian tumors. So look, we are calling about ovarian tumors. We are not calling them ovarian carcinomas as yet. Fine. So because they are Ovaries are small in size, 3 to 4 centimeters. So unless they become huge and big and compress on the surrounding structures or present as mass in the abdomen, they will not be detected. So generally, these patients present in a later stage, especially the malignant tumors, when they become huge in and present with abdominopelvic masses. So that is why majority of the ovarian tumors are detected late. 80% of them are benign, thankfully. Majority occur in young, especially the benign tumors, 20 to 45 years of age. Again, thankfully. Malignant tumors are the ones which occur usually in older women. Here we are calling them from 40 to 65 years of age. And as in all other malignant tumors of the body, 50% of them show P53 mutations. And nearly 1/3 show higher expression of HER2 new oncogene, which we also know is expressed by breast carcinomas. And when in breast carcinomas they express HER2 new oncogene, we give targeted treatment to them using trastuzumab therapy. Fine. So majority of the ovarian tumors are benign. So when you see ovarian cyst and ovarian tumor in a young woman, majority are likely to be benign. Only 20% will be malignant, and that too will occur in the older age group. And most of these would be associated with P53 mutations. So if a patient has both genes showing P53 mutations, so then the chances of ovarian tumors occurring becomes higher. So what are the risk factors for ovarian tumors? Nulliparity, a family history, especially association with BRCA1 gene and BRCA2 gene, which is the BRCA, named for BR for breast and CA for cancer. So they are associated with breast cancer gene 1 and breast cancer gene 2. So family history has to be always asked for when the patient presents with an ovarian mass, especially if it is malignant. Fine. Always ask for history of removal of breast or a previous ovarian neoplasms in such patients. What protects is decreased ovulation, repeated pregnancy, lactation, and use of oral contraceptives. So we really do not know how the oral contraceptives help it, maybe by regulation of the hormonal cycle, but it's known that these are the protective factors which are there for ovarian neoplasms. So this is what we are seeing, the surface epithelial cells, which is a low cuboidal epithelium. Then we have the primordial follicle, primary follicle, the secondary follicle, and a tertiary follicle, in the center of which is an ovum, and it is lined by the theca interna cells and the theca externa cells. And then the ovulation occurs. Then the center of the cavity through which the ovum has been released will be filled with blood. This will form as the corpus luteal cyst, and slowly the blood will be reabsorbed, and the luteal cyst cells will undergo atrophy and they will be replaced by fibrous tissue. So we call them as corpora lutea, and it becomes dense fibrotic corpora as the corpora albicans. In the hilum, we have the blood vessels and the nerve bundles and the lymphatics. Fine. So which are the tumors which occur from all of these cells? So most common tumors which occur in the ovary are ones which are derived from the surface epithelial cells. So they are called as the surface epithelial tumors, and they form nearly 2/3 of all ovarian tumors. From 65 to 70% or 2/3 of all ovarian tumors originate from the surface epithelium. The germ cell tumors form nearly 1/5 of the tumors, 15 to 20% of the cases. And most often the germ cell tumors occur in first and second decade of life, while surface epithelial tumors, the benign ones, occur from 20 to 45 years of age, and the malignant occurs from 40 to 65 years of age. Sex-cord stromal tumors can be seen in all ages, but fortunately they are not so common, just 5 to 10% of all ovarian tumors. And an important group of tumors are the ones which metastasize to the ovary. Now remember, we discussed the modes of spread of the tumor, and when we were discussing in the neoplasia chapter, we discussed that the modes of spread of tumor can be hematogenous, sarcoma spread through blood vessels, which was the hematogenous spread, carcinoma spread to the draining lymph nodes through lymphatics, which was the lymphatic spread, and then we had the direct spread of the tumors, and then we also had the transcoelomic spread. That means through the body cavities. Now, amongst the transcelomic spread, one tumor was taught to you and mentioned to you that was a Krukenberg's tumor, in which the tumors from the carcinoma of the gallbladder, carcinoma of the stomach, and carcinoma of the colon can spread through the peritoneal cavity and get deposited on the surface of the ovary. And it would be involvement of both the ovaries by mucin secreting adenocarcinomas, which is called as the Krukenberg's tumor. Fine. So that was the metastatic tumor spread. It can occur by direct seedling implantation or may also spread through hematogenous route. Now, what are the usual general clinical features of ovarian tumors? Majority of the tumors do not occur from the sex cord stroma. From the sex cord, it is only the sex cord and the stromal cells which secrete estrogen. So because majority of the tumors are arising from the surface epithelial cells and the germ cells, so most are non-functional. It is only the functional tumors of the ovaries which secrete the estrogen or rarely the androgens, the testosterone, which may present with feminizing symptoms or masculinizing symptoms, like the granulosa cells of the tumor, granulosa tumor of the ovaries. Those are the ones which may have effect on the endometrium and may lead to endometrial hyperplasia, and the patient may present with abnormal uterine bleeding. Otherwise, the majority non-functional tumors will not present with abnormal uterine bleeding. The larger ones, the malignant ones, may present with abdominal mass. They may spread into the peritoneal cavity and may present with ascites in the late stages. Or the large ones may compress the urinary tract, and the patient may have frequency of urination because it's causing compression on the urinary tract. It may have compression on the colon, leading to colonic obstruction. So they may be pressure obstructive symptoms on the urinary tract or GI tract. And as we discussed in the chapter of neoplasia, the patients may present with cachexia, which is massive weight loss due to abnormal metabolism. And uncommonly, a pedunculated tumor may lead to torsion along the hilum and will present with infarction of the ovarian tumor, which can generally occur in the ovarian teratomas. So, what are the surface epithelial tumors? One by one, tumors of the surface epithelium may show differentiation towards ciliated columnar epithelial cells. So that means they are resembling the fallopian tube lining epithelial cells. So those tumors which have a resemblance to ciliated epithelium of the fallopian tube, they are called as the serous tumors of the ovaries. The ones which show differentiation towards tall columnar mucin secreting epithelium, which is the normal epithelium of the endocervical lining, those tumors are the mucinous tumors of the ovary. And when the differentiation resembles like that of the normal proliferative endometrium, endometrial glands, we call them as endometrioid tumors. And if the resemblance is towards the endometrial glands, which is seen with vacuolation of the cytoplasm, resembling like the late secretory phase or that in occurring in the pregnancy, then we call it as the clear cell tumors of the ovary. The one which I have not included and is uncommon is when it resembles the transitional epithelium, when we call them as the Brenner's tumor of the ovary. So tumors of surface epithelium would be serous if the lining epithelium is tall columnar ciliated, similar to the lining of the fallopian tube. It may be mucinous tall columnar mucin secreting lining resembling the endocervical epithelium, or it may resemble the proliferative tubular endometrial glandular lining when there could be endometrioid tumors occurring in the ovary, or it could resemble the secretory endometrial glands giving vacuolations in the cytoplasm called as the clear cell tumors of the ovary. Now going one by one, serous tumors of the ovary are the ones which may be low grade or high grade tumors. It is the high grade tumors which have an aggressive behavior and poor prognosis and are associated with mutation of TP53 oncogene. While the low grade tumors are associated with KRAS, BRAF and ERB2 or HER2 mutation, P53 is wild type, it is not mutated. Clear? So the low grade tumors, low grade serous tumors which have a very good prognosis in stage 1 are the ones which are associated with KRAS, BRAF and HER2 or ERB2 mutation. While the high grade tumors will have mutant P53 mutation, they lack the KRAS and BRAF oncogene. Those which have a familial tendency, which are associated with BRCA gene 1 and 2, present with high-grade serous carcinomas. These are the ones which will be seen in families, and the patient may give even history of occurrence of breast carcinomas or ovarian carcinomas in her mother, maternal aunt, or sisters. So those are the ones you have to take the history very carefully. Now, what about the serous tumors? Serous tumors are associated with KRAS proto-oncogenes, and the endometrioid tumors, similar to the endometrial carcinomas of the type 1 endometrioid tumors, are associated with the similar mutations in PNET, PTEN oncogenes, and in the PIK3CA oncogenes. So these are the two important ones which can be seen. Uncommonly, other common mutations which can occur is the TP53 mutations. So this is common between the endometrioid tumors and high-grade serous tumors, which would be commonly associated. So endometrioid tumors of the ovaries, nearly 1/3 may simultaneously, that means synchronously, have endometrial carcinoma as well. Or they may develop ovarian carcinoma later on, and first there may be development of endometrial carcinoma. So either one of them may present first, or they may present simultaneously, when they are called as metachronous or synchronous tumors. Synchronous when they are presenting simultaneously, metachronous when they present in sequence, one after the other. So why are we interested in knowing about the serous tumors? Whether low grade or high grade, they are the commonest ovarian tumors. 40% of all ovarian tumors, that means 4 out of 10 ovarian tumors, are serous tumors. Bilaterality is common, especially for the malignant serous tumors. Malignant serous tumors will be called as serous carcinomas of the ovary. So the serous adenocarcinomas of the ovary in 66% of the cases are bilateral, while benign serous tumors are bilateral only in 20% of the cases. Remember, this figure is opposite in cases of mucinous tumors of the ovary. Now, high-grade serous tumor are supposed to arise from the fallopian tube fimbrial end. So there are lining epithelial cells of the fimbria of the fallopian tube, in which we can see in situ carcinoma or intraepithelial carcinoma, and these are called as the serous tubal intraepithelial carcinoma, or sometimes abbreviated as STIC lesions. Serous tubal intraepithelial carcinoma. So these are the in situ carcinomas which are associated with the high-grade serous tumors of the ovary and are supposed to be the precursor lesions of the serous epithelium. High-grade serous tumors. The other precursor lesions can be the cortical inclusion cyst. That means the surface epithelium gets inside the ovary and forms an inclusion cyst within the ovarian cortex. So these two are considered as the precursor in situ lesions in the of the ovarian high-grade serous tumors. So apart from the serous adenocarcinomas, we have the benign, which is called as the serous cyst adenoma. Then we have the borderline tumor, which is called as the borderline cyst adenocarcinoma. The difference between the malignant serous cyst adenocarcinoma and borderline tumor is that there is no invasion in borderline tumor, though it shows cytological features of anaplasia. So there is high-grade, high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, hyperchromasia, mitosis, pleomorphism, but there is no invasion of the ovarian stroma. So when there is no invasion, we call it a borderline tumor. When it is completely benign, that means no hyperchromasia, no atypia, no mitosis, no stratification, we call it as a benign cyst adenoma. And when there is invasion showing anaplastic serous cells, we call it a serous cyst adenocarcinoma. So what does the benign tumor look like? Benign tumor looks like a simple uniloculated cyst. Very uncommonly, it may be multiloculated, but it will become large in size. So it will be filled up with a clear fluid-like content, thin, clear fluid-like content. So that is why it is called as the serous tumor or serous fluid. The capsule is smooth and glistening. It may become 10 to 15 centimeter in size. There are no solid areas of the lining of the cyst lining, cyst wall. No epithelial thickening is there. It is lined by a single layer of ciliated columnar epithelial cells. In borderline tumors, you will get papillae, and in malignant tumors, there are large solid areas in the wall with papillary projections, multilayering, cytological atypia, necrosis, and invasion. So all the features of differences between benign and malignant tumors are clearly visible over here in the benign serous cyst and the malignant tumors. So this is a large serous cystic tumor which we have seen. So you can see the capsule is intact, but there are prominent blood vessels which are on top of the capsule, which is pearly white in appearance, which is the capsule of the ovary. And in the benign ones, we get, which is the single layer of lining epithelium on a fibrous wall. So there is a thin fibrous wall of 1 millimeter to 2 millimeter in size, and you can see the columnar to cuboidal epithelial cells with cilia on the surface. There may be small microscopic papilla, but they would still be lined by benign looking cells with a low nucleocytoplasmic ratio, no mitosis, no atypia. So sometimes you may get these papillae, but they would all still be lined by a single layer of cells with a fibrous core in it, right? And there is no mitosis, atypia or hyperchromasia. So this is the benign one, low nucleocytoplasmic ratio, basally placed nuclei, cilia on the surface. When there is epithelial multilayering, hyperchromasia, high nucleocytoplasmic ratio and nuclear atypia, we call it a cyst adenocarcinoma, right? So because they are projecting inside the cystic cavity. If it is invading, it is malignant. If it is not showing invasion of the underlying stroma, it is borderline, right? So here we are seeing only the surface papillae which are there. You can see the surface papillae projecting inside the cyst wall, but the wall is not showing any invasion. It is still a thin walled fibrous stroma which is present. While in adenocarcinoma, serous adenocarcinoma, you can see it has gone inside the wall and there is a large sheet-like white growth which is occurring involving the tumor. And what does it show apart from the papillae formation? Nuclear hyperchromasia, nuclear atypia, increased mitosis, and areas of necrosis. And along with that, you have these calcific lamellae. Fine. So lamellations of calcific material, which are called as the Psammoma bodies. So calcific lamellations which occur in the serous malignant tumors of the ovary. So Psammoma bodies can be seen, and this can also be seen in meningiomas. They can also be seen in papillary carcinoma of the thyroid. I'm telling you these three tumors simultaneously because sometimes it can come as an MCQ question for your MD entrance examination. So you can see the lamellic calcific spherules, which are called as the Psammoma bodies. Psammoma bodies occur in the high-grade serous carcinomas of the ovary. They can also be seen in meningiomas, called as the psammomatous meningiomas, and they would also be seen in the papillary carcinoma of the thyroid. So here we can see the microscopic section with large, tall columnar cells with high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, presence of these Psammoma bodies forming gland-like structures and papillae, back-to-back arrangement and infiltrating into this fibrous stroma. So this is a high-grade serous carcinoma of the ovary. So what does the prognosis depend upon? Prognosis depends upon the histological type. The benign ones, very good prognosis, no metastasis, nothing occurring at all. And 5-year survival is very good if there is no invasion. So for benign and borderline ones which show no invasion, there is a 100% 5-year survival. As soon as the invasion occurs, it has infiltrating into the surrounding tissue. It can form large abdominal masses. So there is rapid deterioration, and 70% when there is carcinoma or invasion of the ovarian stroma. And if it has gone on to leading to ascites and peritoneal involvement, the 5-year survival decreases to 25%. So can we diagnose them by, or can we suspect that they are malignant? We can do the CA-125 levels in the serum, which would be increased in the serous and mucinous tumors of the ovary. So the tumor marker which can be done is CA-125. So coming on to the mucinous tumors, as I have told you, the lining epithelium will resemble the endocervical tall columnar mucin secreting epithelium. They are less common than serous tumors, but still form 25% of all ovarian tumors. Usually occur in middle adult life and are rare before puberty or after menopause. Only 20% of the carcinomas are bilateral, in contrast to serous tumors in which 66% were bilateral. So most of them are unilateral tumors, and similar to the serous tumors, they are benign mucinous cyst adenoma, borderline tumors when there is no invasion, though there is anaplasia, and mucinous cyst adenocarcinomas are forming only 15% of all mucinous tumors. So amongst the mucinous tumors, thank God we have majority being benign and borderline varieties, which have a very good prognosis. So when you see multiloculated cystic masses and they are not filled with the thin serous fluid-like content in the serous tumors, they are filled with sticky gelatinous fluid, and when it ruptures through the capsule, it may be present in the peritoneal cavity, and that will lead to formation of pseudomyxoma peritonei. So pseudomyxoma peritonei can occur with rupture of the mucinous tumors of the ovary, whether benign or borderline or malignant, and it can also occur by rupture of the mucinous tumors of the appendix. Fine. So appendix as well as the ovarian tumors, the mucinous tumors, when they rupture and involve the peritoneal cavity, and whole of the peritoneal cavity is filled with the sticky gelatinous fluid, that situation is called as, that clinical condition is called as the pseudomyxoma peritonei. And this is what a malignant tumor of the ovary will look like, which is mucinous in type. So this you can see is the glistening capsule, and here we have both the ovaries, which was an unusual condition, showing bilateral mucinous papillary cyst adenocarcinomas occurring on the surface, some showing a thin sticky content mucinous over here, majority forming large solid masses. So formation of papillae, formation of solid masses, penetration of the capsule. Here there is gross penetration, so there is no doubt about it that this is a malignant. While this is a benign tumor which is formed of the smooth without any capsular breach. The cyst can be located in the ovarian cortex, it can be located in the ovarian medulla, or it can be hilar in location. It will be forming a thin capsule in benign tumors, and it could be a thick surface capsule in malignant tumors. So the benign mucinous cyst adenoma will be lined by a single layer of tall columnar epithelium with basally placed nuclei, no mitosis, no atypia, and an extremely good prognosis. While abundant gland-like or papillary-like growth with nuclear atypia, multi-layering, but no invasion is borderline mucinous tumors. But it can penetrate the capsule and go into the peritoneum, and when it goes into the peritoneum, then the survival would be a little lower as compared to the benign tumors. So here we can see that they are forming multiple complex papillae. So papillae showing another further papillae formation lined by multi-layered epithelium, but the stroma is not invaded, so it is a borderline tumor. And the malignant will be associated with solid growth, presence of solid structures. The glands may or may not be present, marked nuclear atypia, multi-layering, presence of necrosis, stromal invasion, and the 10-year survival decreases to 66% in malignant tumors of the ovary. Here you can see the cut section of the same tumor. It has gone into, and you can see large solid masses of the mucinous carcinoma. Here we can see bilateral mucinous carcinomas of the ovary. This is center, you can see the uterus. It has been opened up, so you can see the endometrial cavity. So there is a small endometrial polyp also over here. The cervix is unremarkable, does not show any growth. Fine. So bilateral mucinous cyst adenocarcinoma seen in this particular gross section, and microscopically you will see multi-layering, papillae formation, and invasion of the stroma. This is all the mucinous content which is present in the cystic cavities. So coming on to the third type of the surface epithelial tumor, which is the endometrioid tumor, and that would be lined by tall columnar cells with a dense pink cytoplasm resembling the proliferative endometrial cells. So that will be called as the endometrioid tumor, and the malignant is called as the endometrioid carcinoma. Then we have the clear cell adenocarcinoma, which is also an uncommon tumor. The other surface epithelial tumors can show differentiation towards transitional epithelium, similar to the epithelium lining the urinary bladder. And when they occur, they also occur as benign, borderline, or malignant. And the malignant will show the same features as transitional cell carcinoma of the urinary bladder. So they are called as the transitional cell carcinoma. The malignant ones would be called as, the benign is called as the Brenner's tumor. Benign and borderline Brenner's tumor, which are formed of the transitional epithelium. So Brenner's tumor is an uncommon tumor, can be solid or cystic. It is mostly unilateral. So there are nests of transitional epithelial cells surrounded by fibroblastic stroma, and the epithelial component resembles the transitional cells. So this is mostly a benign tumor. So you can see these nests of transitional epithelium, and this is present in a densely fibroblastic stroma composed of long spindled out fibroblastic cells. So this is a benign Brenner's tumor. So that was about the surface epithelial tumors classification, which can be serous tumors, they could be mucinous tumors, they could be endometrioid tumors, they could be showing the transitional epithelium differentiation called as the Brenner's. Now, how do we classify the germ cell tumors of the ovary, which are occurring from the germ cell or the ovum over here? So the germ cell tumor of the ovary, the undifferentiated one, is called as the dysgerminoma, which will show a uniform population of the germ cells. We'll describe it, and the counterpart of it occurring in the testes is called as the seminoma. When it forms embryonal structures, then we call it as an embryonal carcinoma. So you will form embryonal tube-like structures. So tubular, glandular, papillary structures is called as the embryonal carcinoma. The tumors which show extra embryonic differentiation, we call them as yolk sac tumor or endodermal sinus tumor. The tumors which show differentiation towards the yolk sac-like appearance or endodermal sinus-like appearance are called as the endodermal sinus tumor or yolk sac. The tumors which show differentiation towards syncytiotrophoblastic cells and cytotrophoblastic cells are called as the choriocarcinoma. And the tumors will show formation of all embryonic tissue of all the three germ layers is called as the teratoma. So this would be arising from the truly potent, multipotent stem cells, and that would be a teratoma. So the most common of this is a teratoma. So how do we classify germ cell tumors? Those which are showing only undifferentiated monomorphic appearance of germ cells is dysgerminoma. If they are forming embryonal tubular-like structures or glandular-like structures, we call it embryonal carcinoma. A tumor which shows differentiation towards yolk sac element or endodermal sinus-like element is called as the endodermal sinus tumor. The one which shows trophoblastic differentiation is called as the choriocarcinoma because it shows presence of both cytotrophoblasts and syncytiotrophoblasts. And the tumor which shows formation of all mature or immature embryonic tissues is called as the teratoma. And the most common of the germ cell tumors occurring in the ovary is a teratoma. Fine. So to subclassify teratoma, teratoma can show all mature tissues of the three germ layers when we call it as a mature teratoma. If it is showing immature structures of the endoderm, mesoderm or ectoderm, we call it immature teratoma. And if it shows predominantly only one type of structure, like only thyroid tissue is present, then we call it struma overi. Or if it is forming only acute cell tumors, then we call it as a carcinoma. I know it is a little confusing. So to classify the germ cell tumors, those which arise from the germ cell are called as the germ cell tumors. The ones which are formed of only monomorphic germ cells are seminoma in testis and dysgerminoma in ovary. Those which show differentiation towards embryonal structures are called as embryonal carcinomas, which form embryonal tubules, embryonal glandular structures, embryonal papillae. Those which show differentiation towards yolk sac elements are called as the yolk sac tumor or endodermal sinus tumor. The tumors which show formation of cells resembling syncytiotrophoblastic cells and cytotrophoblastic cells are called as the choriocarcinoma, and the tumors which show formation of mature or immature tissues of all the three germ layers, mesoderm, endoderm, and ectoderm, are called as the teratoma. Clear? So going on to the teratoma, which is the most common germ cell tumor, it can show all mature tissues. And if it is a solid tumor, we call it a mature solid teratoma. If it forms a cystic tumor, we call it as a mature cystic teratoma. And if it shows all immature tissues, we call it immature teratoma. And if it shows formation of only a single type of differentiation, we call it as a struma overi. Fine. So benign mature teratoma is predominantly cystic and generally shows differentiation or formation of epidermal-like structures. That means skin appendages, which will include the hair follicles, sebaceous glands, sweat glands, So if we see all these structures, we call it as the epidermoid cyst or dermoid cyst of the ovary. Generally occurs in young women, can occur in the pre-pubertal age group or after the puberty, and may be bilateral in roughly 10 to 15% of the cases. It is supposed to arise from the ovum after the first meiotic division. So it is occurring as arising from the germ cell after the first meiotic division. So what does the benign teratoma look like? As I have told you, it is usually a unilocular cyst, and the wall of the cyst shows predominantly epidermal-like structure. So there is ectodermal differentiation showing here cheesy sebaceous material arising from the sebaceous glands. So the wall is thin. It may be opaque or gray-white, wrinkled skin-like appearance. It may even show ectodermal differentiation, formation of tooth, and areas of calcification. So there is formation of hair, there may be formation of tooth-like structures or calcific structures, and sometimes even the mesodermal structures like adipose tissue, muscle may also be seen. So the most common differentiation is epidermis with hair and sebaceous glands. Other skin adnexa may be present, and there may be presence of other adult tissues like mature cartilage, mature bone, mature thyroid tissue, ciliated columnar epithelium of the respiratory tract, then of the bronchus, then you can see any other. So this is one lining, one section which is showing the ciliated columnar epithelial lining. You are seeing the mature adipose tissue. You can see the mature mucus glands. You can see the smooth muscle bundles. You can here see the sebaceous glands also. So this is the dermoid cyst. And here we can see the stratified squamous epithelium, keratin formation. You are seeing the mature cartilage. There are the mucin secreting glands. So arising from all, including neural structures, you can see the brain parenchyma, neurons, glial tissue, neuroectodermal tissue. All of these may be seen, but all should be mature. All should be what we will see in an adult. So all mature, like not which is occurring in an immature infant. Fine. So this will be a mature dermoid teratoma when it shows predominantly epidermal. So what is an immature teratoma? Immature teratoma, thankfully, is uncommon. It is seen in the prepubertal age group, but it grows rapidly. It has a poor prognosis. As compared to mature teratoma, the only treatment which is required is removal of the tumor. There is no chemoradiotherapy required. It's a completely benign tumor, the mature teratoma in the ovary. In testis, the mature teratoma may be malignant, while an immature teratoma of the ovary is generally malignant, and the prognosis is poor unless you have picked it up when it is only localized to the ovary or in stage 1. So they are large, bulky masses, may form 15 to 20 centimeter in size, but they have smooth external surface, may show necrosis, hemorrhage, and will show immature bone, cartilage, calcification, which will be present. Here you are seeing immature components of the neuroectodermal tissues. So components resemble the structures seen when we are developing as a fetus or in an embryo stage. So immature means our microscopic structures are similar. So it could be a developing liver, it could be a developing spleen, a developing cartilage, developing mucus glands, developing bone, developing neural rosettes, and immature mesenchymal or muscle tissue which is there. Uncommonly, a mature teratoma may show malignant transformation, which occurs only in 1% cases of mature teratoma, and any of the component can become malignant. I have only included this slide because sometimes an MCQ comes, which is the most common tumor occurring in a malignant teratoma. So the most common malignant transformation is a squamous cell carcinoma followed by melanoma. Okay. It's easy to remember because squamous differentiation or skin-like epithelial differentiation occurs. So the most common malignant transformation occurring in a mature teratoma is squamous cell carcinoma, which sometimes comes as your NEET exam question. So what is monodermal teratoma? In which specialized tissue is formed. For example, struma oviri, another MCQ question for your MD entrance examination. This thyroid tissue may be functional. And if it is functional, the patient may present with features of hyperthyroidism. And when you are doing a thyroid scan, you feel that it's a normal uptake in the thyroid gland, which is present in the neck. But the lesion, the normal functioning thyroid gland is present in the ovary. So it may present with hyperthyroidism, and very uncommonly, there may be thyroid tumors developing in the teratoma. So similarly, you can have development of carcinoid tumors similar to what occur in the GI tract, and that may present with a carcinoid syndrome. So monodermal teratomas are important to know because they may present with features which may indicate towards some other organ, but when you do an ultrasound examination of the pelvis, you will find that the ovary is enlarged and there is a tumor in it, and once you excise it, the patient becomes normal. So the patient would not require any other treatment. Dysgerminoma is the ovarian counterpart of seminoma of the testis. It is seen in childhood and can be associated with pseudohermaphroditism or gonadal dysgenesis. So it is a uniform, smooth cut surface, and 1/3 are aggressive. It is important to know and differentiate this tumor from all the other germ cell tumors because it responds to radiotherapy well. It is an extremely radiosensitive tumors. Only 1/3 of them are aggressive tumors. It is a malignant tumor, though the suffix is oma. Even though the suffix is oma, it is not showing you a sarcoma or a carcinoma. But remember, it is a malignant germ cell tumor occurring in childhood. So usually presents in young girls between ages of 10 to 12 years of age and shows this morphology. As I told you, it is formed of a uniform population of polygonal cells with a clear cytoplasm. And this whole tumor is divided into lobules, which are separated by thin fibrous septa. So very characteristic feature is the tumor cells are separated into nests and lobules by a thin fibrous septa, and these septa have T lymphocytes. Sometimes you can have granuloma formation in these septa, or you may have syncytial trophoblastic giant cells in these septa. So when you have syncytial trophoblastic giant cells in these septa, the syncytial trophoblastic giant cells will secrete beta HCG, and that beta HCG will lead to increased levels in the blood and in the urine. So you may think that the patient is pregnant, this is a hormones which will be increased in pregnancy also. But in a young woman, in a young child, before they're thinking of your pregnancy, always do an ultrasound abdomen and look whether the ovarian size is enlarged or not. So you have these septa which show T lymphocytes or syncytial trophoblastic giant cells, and this is a very characteristic cell. A large polygonal cell with a centrally placed nucleus, a prominent nucleolus, and pale or clear cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is clear because it has presence of glycogen. And we can demonstrate glycogen by doing a periodic shift stain, which will be positive. And when you do it after giving a diastase, then it will be negative. So you can demonstrate the presence of glycogen in that. Apart from that, it will be positive for OCT3/4 on immunohistochemistry and placental alkaline phosphatase, which would be present in them. Clear? So the tumor marker, which can be positive, slightly raised amount of beta HCG levels can be seen in dysgerminoma, and there would be increased in LDH levels in dysgerminoma. Then coming on to tumor with yolk sac differentiation, we have a yolk sac tumor, also called as the endodermal sinus tumor. And like the yolk sac, it will secrete alpha fetoprotein. So increased serum levels of alpha fetoprotein occurring in a small girl, in a young child. This is also a tumor of young children, is associated with yolk sac tumor, which the cells are rich in alpha fetoprotein and may sometimes be even showing alpha-1 antitrypsin. So the alpha fetoprotein and alpha-1 antitrypsin is secreted by the tumor cells and gets aggregated within the cytoplasm and as extracellular material as pink hyaline globules. Fine. So those are the two characteristic features which can be seen. And these are the tumor cells which show a high nucleocytoplasmic ratio, pale cytoplasm, and it is present in a loose myxoid background. A very characteristic feature of this occurs because it shows a yolk sac-like differentiation or endodermal sinus-like differentiation. So there is a central capillary around which there is a row of the cuboidal tumor cells. So tumor cells present around a central capillary, and this is called as the Schiller dual body. So an 8-year-old child presenting with a pelvic mass, ultrasound shows an enlarged ovary of 10 to 12 centimeter in size. Alpha fetoprotein is raised and Schiller dual bodies are present on microscopic examination. The tumor is yolk sac tumor or endodermal sinus. Fine. I will deal with choriocarcinoma when I deal with the gestational trophoblastic tumors in my next session. But suffice of here to say that this is also a germ cell tumor of the ovary, uncommonly occurs in the ovary and most commonly occurs after gestational trophoblastic tumors. So when it occurs in the ovary, it is a non-gestational choriocarcinoma and it shows presence of cytotrophoblasts and syncytial trophoblastic giant cells. So the tumor marker for choriocarcinoma is beta HCG levels in the serum and blood. The granulosa cell tumors occur in the postmenopausal women, generally most commonly. So 66% of the tumors occur in the postmenopausal women, or 2/3. Uncommonly, there is a juvenile granulosa cell tumor which may present in young children between 10 to 12 years of age, and they may cause precocious puberty because it has feminizing symptoms. So this is the functional tumor of the ovary which will secrete estrogens, and in young children when it occurs, it will present with precocious puberty, and you may think that the patient has attained a puberty earlier at the age of 8 years, but it would be better to have a look at the pelvis whether she has an underlying granulosa cell tumor. They are more often unilateral, and when they occur in the postmenopausal women, they will present with abnormal uterine bleeding because of the endometrial hyperplasia and simultaneous occurrence of endometrial carcinomas and even breast diseases like fibroadenoma and breast carcinoma. So they are all formed of round to polygonal cells and they are present in a follicle-like pattern. So they give you a follicle-like pattern. The nuclei are oval and show a longitudinal groove which gives a coffee bean appearance. So there is a longitudinal groove in all these cells which give a coffee bean appearance, and sometimes you can have this pink basement membrane like material around which the follicles are being formed, and that is called as the Karl-Exner body. I'm only introducing these ones for your entrance examination. Otherwise, you may sometimes get a short note on teratoma. You will get definitely a short note on the classification of surface epithelial tumors and uncommonly on the granulosa cell. Now, till now, we were talking about the cystic tumors or solid cystic tumors. Now, thecoma, fibroma occur from the stromal cells of the ovary, which were the spindled out fibroblastic cells. They secrete estrogens, and these are the cells which will proliferate and form solid encapsulated masses formed of long spindled out cells. When they accumulate lipid into them, they will appear yellow in color, and those are called as the thecomas. And when they are formed of thin fibroblastic-like cells without any lipid in the cytoplasm, it is called as the fibroma. So a fibroma of the ovary occurring with a same-sided or the ipsilateral pleural effusion and ascites is called as the Meigs syndrome. So Meigs syndrome is associated with ovarian fibroma in which there is ipsilateral pleural effusion along with ascites and a solid ovarian mass. So this is a completely solid, white, firm mass of the ovary. No hemorrhage, no necrosis. It's a completely benign tumor. You remove the tumor, all symptoms subside, including pleural effusion and including ascites. So it's not a malignant ascites, it's only secretion from it. Krukenberg tumor you have already read with, you have already done with, so I kept it in the end. So it is a bilateral metastatic tumor present as solid bilateral ovarian masses. Generally, the metastasis occurs from a tumor from the gastrointestinal tract, most commonly from the stomach, can occur from the gallbladder or colon, and this is a direct peritoneal seedling or maybe a retrograde lymphatic spread which has been seen. So because it is coming from the gastrointestinal tract, microscopically it will show signet ring cells. So bilateral solid ovarian tumors you can see over here. This is the uterus, this is the cervix, have GI complaint, epithelial tumors are CA125 levels. For the yolk sac tumors, it is alpha fetoprotein. And alpha-1 antitrypsin. Beta HCG levels would be raised markedly in hundreds and thousands and lakhs in cases of choriocarcinoma, and maybe a few thousand units in cases of dysgerminoma. LDH level remove the lymph nodes, the obturator and the pelvic group of lymph nodes. If it is benign, you need not go in for a radical lymph node dissection. So this is the format in which, when the patient has presented to you, go from the non-invasive to the invasive investigations. Take the help of tumor markers. They will give you a diagnostic criteria, but they will not help you diagnose it. Final diagnosis is by looking at the features of the cells, whether they are germ cells, surface epithelial cells, stromal cells, and whether they are benign or malignant. So, any questions? I know you are there for the next session also. So that was my last slide for today. If there are any questions, you can ask me now or in the next small group discussion when we are having and discussing the various variations. Any questions from the undergraduates or postgraduates over here? I hope I was audible and the slides were visible throughout the session, because I didn't get any complaints in between. So thank you all. We'll end the webinar now, and you can jot down your questions